Hi guys and girls, Clay from Australian Survivalism here. I'm going to talk to you today about Australians having their heads buried in the sand. Australia is one of the most urbanised countries in the world. Statistics estimate that around 40% of Australians live in just two cities, Sydney and Melbourne, while 89% live in the country's other 18 cities of 100,000 people or more. 89% live in cities. Let that sink in. Most individuals raised in these urban environments couldn't hunt, forage, or grow food to save their lives. They're totally dependent on this just-in-time delivery system that's in place to stock our supermarkets on a daily basis. What if that system were to fail? For whatever reason. What could possibly be the necessity for Australians to know how to hunt, forage, and grow their own food? With that in mind, have you ever really thought about where your food may come from? And if for whatever reason the trucks stopped rolling, if Woolies and Coles weren't being restocked, what would happen to our society? Have you thought about what you might do if the power went out for an extended period of time? After all, there hasn't been any investment into power infrastructure. Australia would need to shut 12 of its coal-fired power stations by 2030 in order to do what the Environmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, says is necessary to avoid catastrophic effects of climate change. Now, where does that leave Australians? What do they expect us to do about power if they want us to close over 50% of our power plants? Or do they just not want us to have power? What's the agenda? We already have an overstretched power grid. Have you ever sat down and seriously thought about the everyday appliances that rely on electricity? What if we were to go without power for days, weeks, months, years, for whatever reason? I can assure you that the reasons for us having to endure such a calamity are numerous and real. Here in Australia, over the last decade, we've seen food prices rise dramatically. For the middle class, we've experienced longer working hours, whilst disposable incomes are reduced due to the ever-increasing cost of living, and at the same time, household incomes remain stagnant. People are feeling ever more under pressure. Now, most Australians are blissfully unaware of the fragility of our society that's built upon a house of cards. Australians are spending most of their time watching mind-numbing TV shows or discussing the footy or the cricket. No one seems to be taking notice of the slow erosion of our standard of living and the ever-increasing difficulty to make ends meet, and the ever-growing disparity between rich and poor. Why do monstrosities of corporations pay no tax in this country, whilst the lowest paid workers pay the most tax? And most Australians never even ask why. And what of the despotic politicians in power right now that act in a play of pleasant fiction of caring for the ever-declining middle class, selling off our water resources to foreign businesses and corporations to a point that our greatest river systems are going dry, selling our public assets off like our busiest seaports, to foreign entities. Did you know that Australian politicians own water rights? And when asked, the Premier of New South Wales, her answer was, "I don't have to answer. Australians should trust their politicians." That was her answer. Can you believe the arrogance? These politicians have vested interests in keeping water prices high. They're making millions and millions of dollars off the misery of hard-working farmers, whilst at the same time destroying entire ecosystems and forcing the cost of food ever higher. Fires are raging, burning our landscape with a ferocity that has never been witnessed. Drought, forcing our farmers from the land, increasing our dependence on imported produce. All of these crimes occurring within the highest echelons of power, and Australians are still preoccupied with watching The Bachelorette. There are individuals within the public sphere who know why this is occurring. In fact, there are many thousands, tens of thousands. But for fear of being shunned by the masses, they decide to keep quiet. They keep quiet about their knowledge. And this is the problem. To bring about change within this great country, those of us with a voice, we need to stand up. We need to make a stand and shout our message to wake the sleeping masses, to make them aware of what's happening in our country, indeed in the world, of the agenda of the ruling elite to which we are currently subservient. We are the 99%. We're the 99% of the world that holds up the 1%. We are the foundations. We are the people. We are the power in this nation and the world, not the 1% that continuously reap the rewards of our labour, amassing unimaginable financial gain from our toiling. To understand who's to blame for this awful predicament we find ourselves in, one only needs to look into the mirror. Our silence is deemed consent by the crooked powers that be. Our silence is symbolic of the road that we have paved, enabling these despots to drive headlong on a crash course straight into our freedom. When are we going to stand up and shout, enough is enough? Because if we don't stand up now, what's the outcome for our children? What sort of future are we allowing to be created for our children by those masquerading as our leaders? What will we tell them when there's nothing left for them? Because we allowed these so-called leaders to rob them of their future, so that these pricks can line their pockets with the money that is meant for this country's future. So if you see, and if you feel as I do, then organise, agitate, bring together those of the same mind. And if you're afraid of being arrested for protesting in the street, then these despots have already won. And you've given up before our fight has even begun. What would our grandparents say about that type of cowardice? So stand up, unite, march, shout, we've had enough! In every street, in every park, outside every government building, we've had enough! Wake up, Australia. They've got their own agenda. Wake up. They don't give a shit about you. Wake up.